Welcome to Produce Talks, brought to you by the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. Each episode brings you fresh insights from leaders across the produce supply chain, growers, retailers, innovators, and experts shaping the future of fresh. Wherever you work in the industry, we're here to keep you informed, inspired, and connected. So let's get started.
Good morning. My name is Dan Duguay. I'm the Senior Director of Sustainability at the Canadian Produce Marketing Association. And we are here today, or this morning, to talk about food loss and waste and exploring enabling the conditions for increasing the value of fresh produce loss and waste. So what I'd like to do, we're going to take a few minutes just to sort of set the context for this discussion. And then we're going to introduce our panel and have a conversation about the conditions, the challenges, the opportunities to mitigate food loss and waste across the industry. So if you allow me, I'm going to take a few moments just to set the context and then introduce our panel. I think it goes without saying that food loss and waste is a costly systems challenge. And I say system. This is across supply chains. It affects all the industry, but it's also a major opportunity to recover value. And so I think the essence this morning is, and I would offer this, I don't think we have to convince anyone of the social and environmental reasons to mitigate food loss and waste. I think the challenge is, what are the economic conditions, the business cases to mitigate food loss and waste? And we want to talk more about that this morning and understand that. Because, as we all know, a lot of food is wasted in Canada and globally every year. Fresh produce is especially vulnerable. Again, high perishability. It's just a different kind of food in that way. But also, it's not insignificant in value. And again, these are estimates of somewhere between 17, 18 billion is what we're basically talking about in terms of monetary value. Now, I'm going to share a metaphor that I've been using to talk about this, that many of you have heard, that I've engaged with, is this is a moving the elephant problem. And wonderful AI can generate an image when you ask it to. But the point is this, is no one in the industry is big enough to move this elephant alone. It requires the producers, it requires distribution, it requires retail, it requires policy. And I point out that the fellow on the right does look like he's pushing a rope and he does look like he's from government. And that's just AI. I didn't ask it to do that. But you get the point, right? There's a lot of people trying to move this elephant. And this is a metaphor that we've been using to advance this work, understand what the issues are. So as I say with the moving the elephant problem is it's two problems. What's the elephant and where are we trying to move it? So I'm going to use this metaphor to point out a few things. We've been very busy with our members to understand the elephant, and happy to say that we just recently published a report for our members that includes sort of a landscape of what the policy landscape is, what is the industry saying, what are the economics of food loss and waste, some recommendations on how to maybe start to tackle this, but also some annexes, things like decision tools, the food ecosystem. It's amazing the number of actors in this space. And some of them are on our stage today, some of them are members in the audience that are involved in the mitigation of food loss and waste. And lastly, this is complex because we're talking about a food that's perishable, that on a Monday is totally suitable for human consumption. By Friday, it's not. It's a very important dimension of mitigating food loss and waste within our industry. So we're doing also a number of things to, as I say, identify the challenges to move the elephant. We've got a survey open right now for grower, packer, shippers to better understand the food loss and waste issue. So anyone in the audience who's a grower, packer, shipper, please scan the QR code or please come and see us at our booth. We'd love to get a better sense of what you're facing, what your challenges are within the grower, packer, shipper side of things. And this is, again, to understand those causes, how that's being managed, what some of the pain points are, and what some of the opportunities by extension might be. So this is work that we're doing now. The other piece is, this is work we've been doing in collaboration with Dalhousie University, is understanding shrink at the retail level. And again, that's a different environment, different context. So I'm happy to say that there's some preliminary findings that really sort of identify, and this is very, very high level in terms of, it's happening consistently across categories. There's operational factors, there's structural logistical issues, there's operational focus. This is work that we're going to complete over the next month or two and have something much more comprehensive in the summer. But again, understanding that part of the elephant. And lastly, there's work that we've been doing that goes beyond the supply chain. And I think, again, not just the CPMA, but I think a lot of actors in this space. An example is we've been working with Costco to get information to consumers about how to mitigate food loss and waste in the home. That's going to be part of the Costco Canada magazine this summer. The other piece is on advocacy. Federal, provincial, territorial ministers are increasingly engaged on the conversation around food loss and waste. But this is being driven by economic and food affordability concerns, but also environmental and climate concerns, but also the social piece, so you get the point. It is really being driven multidimensionally. And lastly, I think there's questions of research. And this is a factoid or an anecdote that was shared a few weeks ago, that a spoilage event at home decreases a repurchase by over a third and lasts for about a month. Things happen in the home, especially with produce, and it has an impact on what the consumer is likely to do in terms of buying produce again. So that has ramifications not just for food loss and waste, but it has ramifications for the business overall. So these are some of the things that we're trying to better understand. But I'm going to share this because this, I think, was a key part of our landscape work, is the industry is already doing a lot to move the elephant. And these use cases that you see on the screen, these are going to be available early next month. We're at about 15, Julie, or 16 use cases, and this is but the beginning. My point is this: the industry efforts vary significantly depending on four things. Where the food is, what the perishability of the food is. It's very different for a potato than it will be for lettuce, obviously. Where's the optimal destination? In other words, depending on where that food is, can you get it to a food bank? If not, can you get it to an upcycler? If not, can you get it to, point is, can you keep it out of landfill, but where can you get it? And lastly, who's the partner you're working with? And so I think the message here is there's already a lot going on in terms of how to move the elephant, but it looks really different across the industry. And I think that's a key point, because then from a policy point of view in that, how do we get this right? Because we don't want, the answer to the industry is not just one of these use cases, it's the array of these use cases. Okay, and we're going to talk about a bit of this morning. So that's basically bringing us to, we want to get some insights and share those insights with the room this morning in terms of from those that are moving the elephant in various ways, because they've tackled and understood the complexities of the system. They've considered the economics. There's the policy context in which this is being done. There's partnerships that they've established, and there's the barriers that they've overcome. And really, back to this question of economic, is what are those economic signals, what are those economic considerations that they're working through to really unlock that value of that surplus, that food loss or food waste. Okay, so that's the theme this morning. So with that, thank you for the opportunity to frame this morning's discussion. I want to introduce our panel. And what I like to say here is that what I'm excited about is that we have a panel of members who represent very different actors in this system. Producers, distributors, connectors, retail, and food banks, as an example. Back to my moving the elephant problem. These are people that are all engaged in moving this elephant from a very different perspective, but are necessary to do so. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, their organization, and then we're going to have a conversation about some of the various different challenges that we've laid out. So I'll start with Jessica.
Hi, my name is Jessica Wynn Fenning, Fenning's Organic Vegetables. We're a 700-acre organic vegetable farm in New Hamburg, so west of Kitchener, between Kitchener and Stratford. We grow over 40 different crops and are a year-round wholesaler. And my role at the farm is sustainability and growth specialist, so looking after our food surplus diversion and new and prospect customers.
Welcome. Hutch.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Hutch Morton. I'm with J.E. Russell Produce. We're a wholesaler at the Ontario Food Terminal. Largely known for berries, but we do a lot of lettuces, organic veg, and not entirely a full line, but a pretty robust line.
I'm Jessica Regan with Food Mesh. So we're a national food recovery service provider helping build tools and services for businesses and governments to help find alternative markets for their surplus food. So we're connecting, managing, and measuring that food.
I'm Julie Dixon-Olmsted. I'm a consultant in the food and sustainability systems in the country. I spent about 30 years working in retail and wholesale grocery, and about 10 of that working particularly on moving the needle on food loss and waste. So it's a passion project of mine for sure. Today, I sit on the board of the Canadian Council for Food Integrity and do work with National Zero Waste Council and a few other organizations, both in industry, nonprofit, and government.
Vince Barletta, President and CEO, Harvest Manitoba, based out of Winnipeg. Harvest Manitoba is Manitoba's food bank. So we serve through a variety of food security programs, around 100,000 Manitobans every month. We do that through food recovery, food purchasing, various avenues, and getting about 13 million pounds of food last year out to about 50 different communities across the province on a regular basis.
All right. Well, thank you. So as you can see, nice cross-section, different perspectives, all working to move this quintessential elephant. So we're going to start. We have 5 questions that we want to 5 themes we want to work through this morning. And the first is the reality of the food rescue system. So again, we often talk about food rescue as a solution, but in practice, it's constrained by logistics, food safety, timing, market access, etc. So our first framing question is, what does the panelists see as the greatest friction today? What changes would make the biggest difference in terms of what the way the food system is currently configured? And we're going to get Vince to kick us off on this one.
Yeah, well, thanks, Dan. I know we were talking about some of this in advance. And first of all, just a big thanks to you for organizing this panel and bringing this discussion up through the Sustainability Committee meetings yesterday as well, and the research that you've been doing, because that level of coordination between the individuals that are on this stage, industry, broadly speaking, civil society groups, government, to me is really at the heart of of some of the realities, some of the challenging realities that we face. As I've said to you already, Dan, in the food bank world, as I like to say, we don't really have a supply chain. We have a surprise chain. We don't know what's coming in the door from day to day, from week to week, from month to month. And that makes it very, very challenging for us to be able to reliably deal with the surplus that we get, particularly when we're dealing with high perishability items, fresh produce, and the like, to be able to actually move it through our facility across the geography of Manitoba, including places like northern Manitoba, where we're dealing with a lot of fly-in First Nations communities, and we're doing air cargo work to those communities. So you're taking already a highly perishable product that's probably nearing the end of its usable life. Now it's come to a food bank. Now we need to deal with it. We need to get it onto a truck or onto a plane or wherever it's got to go and get it around. So to me, Dan, that key issue of how do we build greater coordination between industry and organizations like Harvest and others that are in this room to be able to understand what's coming and work as a supply chain instead of a surprise chain?
Yeah. And I'd offer, and love to hear, of course, from the others, that this concept that there are these parallel supply chains. The industry has the primary supply chain that goes to retail and its core customer. Now there's these parallel supply chains, right? And so the expectations of those and the management of those, I think, is a key part of this enablement. And again, the kind of partnership you need to make that happen. Any other thoughts on that or building on this?
I mean, looking at our farm operations, and I'm sure many farms might be in the same boat, historically, anything that didn't meet spec, we would compost. And not because it wasn't, still good, it just wouldn't meet specs, and we wouldn't have the desired clientele at that point to be able to move it. And a lot of farms are dealing with, constrained efficiency, or maybe not efficiencies, but capacity to be able to take on extra projects. And when you add that diversion chain and you have to go out and find new opportunities and deal with tens of thousands of pounds or more of food to move it in a timely manner. I don't know if you know this, but farmers' plates are pretty heaped, and adding more to that, well, stuff is going to fall off. So for us, we started working with Second Harvest, and my friend Maureen is here, in 2023. And that kind of provided the ability for us to scale up our diversion. We had always been donating locally to smaller organizations, but they're obviously constrained not only with spatial capacity, but volunteer capacity. And, it's challenging for us to get it directly to their door every week. So Second Harvest kind of provided that perfect middleman where they come to the farm and pick up. And then we're able to do exactly what we intended to do in the first place of feed people. So they take our grade out, they sort it, and then whatever they can't use from that, they send it back to us and we compost. So we're still getting our compost. We're still able to, reclaim that and use it for our fields, but we're also giving the opportunity for what is salvageable to be taken out and have its highest best use. The compost should never be the first resort for perfectly edible food, but moving up higher on the hierarchy of, if not retail worthy, then maybe processor. And if there isn't a processor at that point, then donation, then animal feed if it works into the diet of the livestock, then compost, but never landfill. And I think in terms of opportunities, definitely increasing the cold chain capacity and having players across the country who are able to work with the food. But ultimately, food banks can't be the silver bullet. There needs to be better ways of managing it across the industry. And I don't think there's a single perfect option or answer for that.
Yeah. And I think that's a key point, again, is the work that I think we've done that's revealed this is it looks really different depending on the circumstance. It looks really different depending on the commodity. So again, starting to recognize that, okay, what does it look like when it's working?
Yeah, I would say, Dan, that there's no lack of will and there's no lack of solutions being implemented in every organization we've talked to, the work CPMA has done in the research and the interviews and now the use cases. It shows that there are multiple approaches being taken. It's, I think generally speaking, the produce industry is a collection of the world's best kept secrets in some ways. So I think illuminating this work is really important. I think that there's a lack, the system isn't quite there yet. So the work that's being done now on how to better connect the actors in the system and recognize that our nonprofit partners in this work are actually a legitimate part of the value chain that isn't going anywhere needs to be contemplated. And I mean, I'll get into my thoughts on policy in a minute, but I think there's no lack of will to do the work. And I think everyone's eager for common ground from which to start and how to measure it. Actually,
Right.
We can't manage what we don't measure.
And having that collaboration across the country and across every community.
Our food rescue systems, I mean, there's thousands of organizations across the country and they're doing such incredible invisible work. But if you look at the economics, a lot of them are really struggling. They're relying on private donations. And if we start to see them as actual solution providers, not just here, take some free food, they're actually helping solve a problem. We need to really start to look at the economics. We talk about a circular economy. Let's look at the economics of actually diverting this food. There's a huge social, public, environmental impact. So really starting to look at how do we support them so that they're not going insolvent. And it's not just the food rescue organizations, it's the upcyclers and whatnot. So we really need to look at the economic model throughout all of this.
Well, I think this is a great segue, Hutch, because we were going to ask you about the next topic, the economic signals and how that's playing into the decision making. And again, as we said at the outset, I think we have to create an argument for the social and environmental reason to do this. But what are the business conditions? What are the economic signals? What are the incentives and possibly even the disincentives that need to be accounted for to help shift behavior? And again, on this slide, I just point out, this is not a new topic. People are trying to understand this. It's part of our report that we just put out, the economic considerations, but it's work that others have been doing more sort of in the produce industry specifically, or in the food industry more broadly, and even in the context, of the economics of feeding the hungry, if you want to take it to that point. So, Hutch, let's start with you in terms of what do you see as the economics of this and how this is playing out from your perspective?
The food terminal is a pretty interesting use case for food loss and waste. We receive all sorts of different products, commodities, categories in varying states of produce perfection, right? We see everything from things that are kicked from chains that show up at the food terminal that need to find a home to things that are brought in that just sit around too long and should find a home. Now, the beauty of our food terminal here in Toronto, on a busy day, we're going to sell to 400 different customers. So we'll write 400 different bills. One of those bills might be 28 pallets, a full load of strawberries to a major chain. We will also sell one case of those same strawberries to a customer who walks out with them in their hands. And so we have access to a huge variety of customers who have access to a very different segment of an audience, of their end customers. When we sell to a chain, that stuff is heading to a DC. How quickly that ends up on a store shelf, it depends on the DC, but that is days, not hours. We will sell things to customers who are going to take it away from the terminal and sell it out of the back of their truck in their communities later that day. Customers who have multiple stores who are going to take that to their storefronts and put it out on the sidewalks, potentially regrading it at the back of the store to make it more palatable, safer, whatever you might call it, to maximize the value of that product. And so the terminal is an amazing place to do what we do best, which is simply find a home at the best value for the people that we're working for. So we work for the shippers who on farm send this to us, the packers, the shippers, as well as our customers who we have to on a daily basis have the product that they need to stock their shelves, but at the same time provide them the value that they can then go bring to their customers. So when it comes to economic indicators, every day we walk in and we see and we hear from our customers what's happening out there. Before our doors open, we likely know to a large degree what the price of a case of strawberries is going to be on the market that day. Now, there's going to be the best strawberries and then the strawberries that have been around for since Monday, and we're talking on Thursday, right? And so you obviously have to find your home within that. But the important part for us is simply that when we are doing our best, we have next to zero waste.
Yeah.
Now, an aspect of what we do that I think is challenging is, there's packed on dates, there's best before dates. We do a lot of packaged salads. We have a scenario in which, because we sell as many packaged salads as we do, we have trained our customers, unfortunately, to be quite savvy. They know when we're going to have new product come in. And so do they want to buy a packaged salad on Wednesday when they know the new stuff is going to be there at 4 a.m. the next morning? They really don't. And so now we're in a scenario where we actually do a lot of work directly with food banks, as well as through the food terminal. I'll talk a little bit. I'm not here to be a mouthpiece for the food terminal, but we do some good things down there. We're not always the solution, but we're not always the problem. Best before dates, we don't want to sell product that has less than 7 days simply because now we're going to be selling it. We're going to create customers who want to buy things for $2 when they should be paying $22. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of that product that is short dated, rather than sell it at discounts, we're going to give it to food banks. And so we work directly with Second Harvest. We do a lot with them, as well as what they do, and Helping Hands at the terminal, what they do also through the food terminal. So that's a little bit about, I guess.
Well, I think actually you've touched on this, again, this maximization of value, right? And again, depending on the quality of that product, your example of the food that's on the Wednesday versus the new stuff on Thursday. Like I think a core challenge, and I want to obviously hear from the others, is this maximization of value, and depending what state it's in, okay, where can we get it? Where's the next best place to get it to? So thoughts from the others in terms of how's this economics playing out?
Definitely on the best before, I think there's a lot of misconception. Best before doesn't mean bad after. So if we can all agree that, we can extend that, there's a lot of confusion that leads to that waste and lack of purchasing. And it's painful when you don't sell that food. It's even more painful when you have to pay to throw it out. And so if you look at the economics, oftentimes people say waste is the lowest of my priorities. I've got HR issues and sales and all these different other competing priorities. This is more effort than it's worth to divert or donate. And we find that a lot. But again, getting back to the economics and talking to that CFO, that's the block. Say, if you think about a retailer higher along the supply chain, their profit margin's around 2% roughly. If you look at 2 to 3%, so for every dollar of cost that you reduce is equivalent to $50 of revenue. So if you start to reframe the question saying, by helping reduce the waste and how much you're paying to get rid of it, this actually has a very strong economic case. So we can all start to have a shared narrative on why this makes a strong economic, as well as the human and the environmental components.
Yeah.
Just maybe a follow on to that. I think there's two pieces that go hand in hand. One is potential economic incentives like tax credits, and there is a federal credit in place. Various provinces have various types of provincial credits in place, Ontario being one of them, Manitoba not being one of them, although we're working with government. Hopefully we can address that to create certain incentives through the tax system to hopefully enable and unlock more food surplus that's available for organizations like Harvest Manitoba and others. That needs to go hand in hand, though, with investments in infrastructure. And so for an organization like ours that's seen our volumes go up by 150% since the pandemic in terms of the number of people that we serve based on the level of food insecurity that we're seeing all around the country, and certainly in a place like Manitoba, we need to now make investments in our infrastructure, warehousing, cold storage, our distribution capabilities, our truck fleet, and then with individual agencies that we serve, there's 400 agencies that we serve, to be able to make those investments. So there's also economic signals that sort of trickle down to the food bank as well in terms of making these kinds of investments and understanding whether the food will be there to be able to fill that new cold storage to maximize the use of that shipping fleet.
Yeah. We're obviously on our next topic, we'll talk on the policy piece. I think that's obviously core to this, but thoughts from the others on terms of the economics?
I echo the hierarchy of best use. And then the tax credit was going to be my next point, where it's only 4 provinces that actually have one. So having a national program like that would definitely improve incentive to have the donation stream. But ultimately, it just makes business sense to have that diversion stream and that capacity and capability to reduce your ultimate loss. If not the next best use pathways that reduce direct loss, it also lowers disposal and hauling costs to, I've sat on this too long. Now it's waste. No one can enjoy it. I have to find a home for it. And that's going to be compost or landfill. It improves forecasting where, okay, I've shrunk, a lot of packaged salads. It looks at your buying practice. And, why do we have so much? Do we need to scale back? Or conversely, we're shrinking or we're grading out a lot of carrots, let's say. Okay, does it have to be grayed out? Can we find another home for it, whether that's a processor? And then secondary revenue streams from the byproduct, or also the byproduct from the byproduct, where we compost for a processor and take their product back. So then we're getting a revenue stream on that side, and then they have a lower disposal and hauling cost as well.
I think one of the observations or learnings that I took that I found quite interesting recently was the trend toward economics in the food banking sector, and the investment that the nonprofit sector is now making into things like funding the labor costs to keep a production line going, funding the packaging costs and the processing investment that's required to move produce off field and into food banking networks that can make use of it. There's investment to be made. There's really interesting implications, I think, in terms of labor. If there's the ability to keep folks in those jobs longer or employed. We haven't even looked at that, Dan, but what might that mean for the industry if we have more certainty in the workforce? I had the opportunity to work with Dan on that set of documents we're looking at up on the screen right now. And what we started to contemplate was how the hierarchy actors and the hierarchy work is shifting more toward the economic implications, right? So if you look at where you are and you're diverting maybe to animal feed, but there's actually an economic benefit that we can illuminate that allows you to move up the value chain to people, for example. The first order businesses that a person might not know or a company might not know that that's even possible.
Yeah.
So as we start to bring that into light, how might we model that or be able to put the work to that or the rigor to that to predict what that might save you in opportunity cost or just straight up savings in your diversion costs.
Yeah.
So
and I would reiterate
material.
I think that was a really encouraging and really exciting insight was look how different it is, but look at how they've created that value, but also look at the different partners, people that they're working with. So again, the economics obviously are core to this, and I think this is a great segue to our next topic, which I'd like to pick on, is policy. Now, I'm going to show this picture, which is going to confuse everyone because it's intended to. This is the European diagram of product flow and food waste generated along the food supply chain from 2017. The point is this is complex. And if policy is going to be developed provincially or federally, the issue is produce is but a few of those lines in this big picture. There will not be policy for produce only. Food loss and waste policy, related infrastructure investment will be for food. So we're part of that conversation. So from our perspective, and again, we've heard about tax credits, but want to build on this for a few moments. There's regulatory drivers, there's different incentives in here. So where are the gaps? Where are the challenges around policy that are in the way? Because ultimately we are talking to governments, we're talking to regulator policymakers, but this is what they see when they talk about food waste. Now, we're not an insignificant part of that story, but we're not the whole story. So with that as a backdrop, Julie, we'll start with you in terms of what do you see as, from a policy point of view, that are the gaps and the challenges for the industry?
Sure, I'm smiling at your diagram because I have one for EPR that I drew once, and I call it my hot mess slide. So I would group this answer into two parts: what's starting to work and where the system in Canada still seems to be holding itself back. So what's working? First, landfill bans and organic diversion policies. They're not perfect, but they have changed behavior. And once there's a cost to disposal, people start looking for alternatives. And that's opened the door to recovery and better internal practices. Second, the shift we're seeing toward food banks and recovery organizations acting as real system partners, not just charities. They're receiving surplus inventory that would otherwise become a cost burden, as we've heard. They're also aggregating, purchasing, and moving product at scale. That the order of magnitude is somewhere in the neighborhood of, if I was to add them all up and be, it's bad Julie math, so forgive me everyone who knows more than I, but probably 500 million pounds of food a year are being moved through the nonprofit sector, probably similar amount in revenue being spent on that work, if that's fair. They're buying about as much in that context. That's a meaningful shift. Third, the push toward better measurement. So we're getting closer to understanding what can realistically be moved and used, which is what people need actually to make decisions. Where it gets harder, the hierarchy still matters. Job one is keeping food out of the landfill, and policy is doing that, but the preference is to keep food in its intended use, feeding people. That's where the value is. And the challenge within that is not at all costs. So that's what we've heard over and over again, actually, from all actors in the system. It's what gets us stuck. If it's too complex or too expensive to move that product, the system defaults to lower uses, or it doesn't move at all. So we've built policy in Canada that pushes food down the hierarchy, but not enough that pulls it up. In other words, policy doesn't do enough to make it easier to keep surplus food in the food system. And that ties directly to economics. The industry is already doing a lot. So are food banks, recovery organizations, processors, logistics partners, both sides of the system are carrying more than they should. So the issue isn't effort, it's design. Right now, a lot of this still runs on goodwill, workarounds, and relationships, and that does not allow for scale. So where I'd focus is less on new programs, not withstanding the tax incentive across the country, but more enabling what already exists. Treat surplus as a managed flow, not an exception. Build predictable pathways for it and align policy, infrastructure, and economics so participating actually works. And if we do that, the value will show up in all ESG measures.
Okay. Thank you for that, Julie. Very comprehensive. Thoughts or?
Yeah, well, maybe just to say, I mean, in Manitoba, we've been pushing for really a provincial food security strategy. And again, to the point that there's no one silver bullet that's going to, we pull this lever and all of a sudden it unlocks a mountain of food and we can get it to everybody that needs it. Because there's so many moving parts. That industry component, you talked about the landfill bans, which is something that, in Manitoba, we have some mixed feelings about. I mean, because what we don't want to have happen is everybody showing up to our door with truckloads of potatoes and truckloads of everything under the sun that we don't have the capabilities to handle, to move, to distribute, to store, to warehouse. In and of itself, that single solution doesn't solve the challenge. But if there are a system of changes that are made on the policy side, and government does have a critical role to play, this isn't something that industry working with civil society are going to be able to deal with without some significant investment from governments, federal and provincial. Again, particularly on thinking of the infrastructure side of this conversation. In our context, we've had growth of 100+%, 150% volume growth, and taken on new programs like school nutrition that we're doing delivery of across our province. Our facilities are at the max, so we're looking at making a $30 million investment along with government and our donors to invest in new facilities that will include more cold storage, more frozen storage, so that we can deal with more produce, particularly, and be able to have the capabilities to handle that. That still leaves unaddressed challenges at the local community level in terms of the local food bank and what they have to maintain their cold chain. And in addition to that, I think smart investments around the country, and we've been working with Food Banks Canada on this, around food transformation investments. And there are particular locations around the country where some light processing at the food bank level, the regional food bank level, to be able to do more grading and bagging of potatoes, to be able to do some flash freezing of produce, to have commercial kitchen facilities which are able to process certain commodities into meals for the school nutrition programs, for example. So making those smart investments in partnerships with government and in the provincial context as part of what we hope would be someday a Manitoba food security strategy, but involving government, involving civil society, and involving industry hand in hand in that coordinated approach.
I think one key misalignment, we were talking about this earlier, but Canada doesn't have bans on the disposal of edible foods in landfill. But looking at South Korea as a standard, not only do they have this ban, but they also rolled it out with incentives. So it's not just this blanket law like we were saying France did, where they just went in, okay, here's a law, we're just going to go with it and fingers crossed that it works and we'll figure out the rest later. By embedding the incentive into actually adhering to this, it has more consumer buy-in for that. But also without having a standardization and measurements, it leads to uneven adoption across the country and a lack of aggregate data that you can actually use. That being said, if Canada was to adopt a policy of a ban on food waste, it would need to be done strategically, not just having incentives, but also looking at how municipal waste is handled across the country. And I think it's a very similar situation of, again, we're saying silver bullet, but there isn't a cookie cutter option across the country. It needs to be tailored, whether that's provincially or even on a smaller scale and municipally, to see what works for each individual area.
I'm a fan of the industry getting together, all actors actually, and figuring out what needs to be true for this to work for all parts of the value chain so that we can then work with government to enable the incentives around that would actually enable it. I had a conversation with a colleague in government last week, I think it was, who actually said we recognize that the risk is ours to bear, Canada's to bear, to enable this to work. And there's recognition now that this is a new market channel we're talking about. It's not intended to compete with the retail channel or the consumer channels. There's enough work to go around for everybody, and this unlocks new market opportunity. And I think that recognition is being had, and we need to, I would encourage industry, writ large, all of you, go to those meetings, participate in those discussions. When someone asks you if you want to come and be part of a conversation where these things are being contemplated, please go and give your perspective on what it actually means on the ground, because in the absence of that knowledge, with the best of intentions, those policymakers will do things to us that we would much rather they do with us.
To the degree that we can agree that food security is part of our national security and a growingly important piece of that, I would support the notion of our federal government, as they go and spend lots of dollars to make Canada strong, that we invest in the places in the infrastructure where we could do this sort of minimal processing to enable what we have plenty of. There is plenty of food that can be used to make it usable. Like, we're at record levels, obviously, at the food banks, and we need to solve that problem. And I think there's a desire to. So to your point, Julie, like, get out there and make your voices heard, that there's a viable way and a valuable way to make our money be spent in a way that increases access to healthy food for all Canadians. So.
I'm going to recommend we go to the next question, which is about our business models and our partnerships. And again, I think the little supply chain picture really conveys that I think there's partnerships happening across this supply chain to address this issue. And I mean, what are the examples of the partnerships that are helping us? I think we'll start with you, Jessica, because you've already spoken to some of that. Who are you working with? Again, I think to use that moving the elephant metaphor, alone is one thing, but alongside others to enable this parallel supply chain, I think is core. So can you share what you're seeing in terms of what works?
Yeah, so touching briefly back on to our partnership with Second Harvest. Since 2023, we've donated, what was my updated numbers from yesterday? 1.14 million pounds of food, while having that circularity of taking back their grade out and composting for them. So that partnership is something that, if anyone asks me a question, I will go on for about 20 minutes just talking about it. I feel like I should be on their payroll and on commission for how much I promote them. So the partnership that we have, not only with them, but other smaller food banks in our area, it's a way for us to ensure that, and talking to my contact at our closest food organization, what they often receive from other parties, it's either highly processed and people don't have the access to fresh fruits and vegetables, or it shouldn't have been donated in the first place. And that's really where the barrier is, and making sure that we're not using donation as the only option. And if it's better as compost it. It can't just be this bucket of, here you go, I hope you can do something with it. Our partnerships with processors is a good way for us to divert the food that is still perfectly edible, but maybe slightly ugly or oversized, things that we can still get an economic return from, which ultimately making money is important for businesses to stay in business. So looking at that value as well. So we have one processor in Toronto who takes tens of thousands of pounds of carrots that don't meet any other spec for us. They just require no rot, no rocks, which obviously we don't want to send to anyone. Rocks aren't that edible. And so they're able to process it, turn it into a value-added product. And, they can use whatever, like the broken carrots, the crookeds, the things that we would have otherwise just gone straight to animal feed or had composted. But there was also a really interesting case recently that we had to deal with where we have a partner farm in Mexico for our import program, and they sent us some gorgeous celery that was very oversized. So we had to trim it down, and the outer ribs of the celery were still absolutely perfect. And there was no there was a conversation of, okay, do we put it in a bin or do we find something else? And there was a separate processor in Toronto who took this already disassembled celery and was able to process it quite quickly. And then we had an economic return on that. It saved them money, and ultimately it didn't end up going to waste, which is the primary goal. But looking at stuff that does eventually go to waste, because that is a portion, shrink is an unfortunate current inevitability, which I hope won't always be the case for most businesses, and working towards that. But like I said, composting, both for Second Harvest, a distributor out of Toronto, as well as a processor, so that they have, again, those lower disposal fees, we get the product, and then it's returning those nutrients directly to the soil that those crops are going to come from the following season. So having that partnership and that, continuous weekly pickup or drop off of the grade out, so that we can have that value added product through our compost.
So great examples of even multiple partners to address those various dimensions. Other thoughts in terms of how partnership is enabling what you're doing?
Just thinking of it again in the Manitoba context, Peak of the Market, one of your members here, one of our potato packagers, marketers from Manitoba, we're just entering into a new partnership there where, given the volumes that we want to be able to move of packaged potatoes, where we're having Peak do the packaging for us at their facility, taking some pressure off of our current facility, just from a volume perspective. We have volunteers that sort potatoes and bag potatoes, and it's a good program for those volunteers. But to be able to have higher volume work done at a place like Peak of the Market, again, another example where we can use some of that excess capacity that's existing in industry to be able to do that work in a bit of an innovative way. So I think there's some definite opportunities there. Just looking at your slide, talking about issues like transportation. Again, Second Harvest has been mentioned, plays a role in that. Food Banks Canada plays a role in that. And I know from an FBC perspective, looking to work with other parts of the food industry to identify opportunities where there is surplus production capacity, for example. How do we scoop some of that up to be able to produce some products directly for the charitable food sector? So I think there's lots of opportunities around to look at those partnerships. But again, we're not going to get to the bottom of any of them if we're not continuing to have these kinds of conversations.
Yeah.
Just to add to that, I think one big shift that I've seen over the last 10 years is before, there were a lot of the food rescue entities were quite siloed and there wasn't a lot of sharing of the food. And what I find now is that there's a lot more sharing. They're coming more from a position of, if they're more coordinated and they pick up on their scheduled days, they can unlock more food rather than vying for the same donor. So I see a lot of sharing, a lot of collaborations amongst the food rescue entities, which is amazing. It helps solve a large problem for the industry. But there's more that we can be doing too. If you even think about the different stakeholders in the ecosystem, like waste haulers. Conventional waste haulers actually have a role here to break our status quo. They're picking up the food that they see is still edible, but they're the ones who are picking it up and sending it to either compost or landfill. So working with them, we do a lot of work to try and let them know that there's other options. You don't just have to throw it out. It could even just be an upcycler. So the point is there's an invisible network of solution providers that exist within their Canadian landscape, and finding those and connecting them and creating those business partnerships. So part of our work with Food Mesh, we're a business, we're a B Corp. And so we charge a fee for our service and we do a revenue share with our partners because, well, that's part of our B Corp status, but also because it helps stand up the solution space and helps create a more resilient and robust, like I said, outlets other than just throwing it out. So we got to break that status quo, and it really comes down to these creative business models.
Quickly, just touch on what we do at the food terminal. So 2.1 billion pounds come through the terminal on an annual basis. Less than 1% of that is food loss and waste. 8 years ago, we spent millions of dollars to build a very, state-of-the-art, what we call dump. But that dump is what goes to the waste, but they also filter out and divert food that can go to both for animal food processing, animal food, as well as for food banks. That said, less than 1% of 2.1 billion is still a lot of millions of pounds of food. And so while they give, I think they said last year was about 500,000 pounds to food bank, we did ourselves 100,000 direct with a food bank. Other houses, there's 20 houses there. So everyone is doing their part, but the waste itself is still a huge cost center for us at the terminal. And so I love to hear farms like what they're doing at Fennings. We sell plenty of Fennings organic vegetables in the summer and fall. For them not to be dumping that product just at the food terminal and finding the best use for what they can deem to be excess is far better use than for it to end up down at the food terminal. Because I know one of the challenges that we face at the food terminal is, yes, we have a customer for just about anything, but as a business, all 20 of us probably fall into the pitfall of there's going to be that sale. And so instead of waiting for that perfect sale for, that berry to be sold on Friday at 1 p.m., and now it's going to sit there until Sunday at 4 a.m. when customers come back, finding a home for that on Thursday would have been the best option. And so there's work to be done. There's partnerships out there, but I love to hear what, a farm like Jessica's doing, that the excess isn't just ending up down there where it's now on the terminal to find sort of the best next use for it.
This matter is very complicated and cannot be solved in isolation by anyone. This is a matter where we have the will, we have the common interest, we have the participation rate in this topic is wild to me. I've never seen, we started doing food loss and waste work, like I say, about 10, 15 years ago. And the speed at which community will engage in helping solve this issue is like nothing I have ever seen. And I've done a lot of stakeholder work in my life, and it's pretty powerful. People want to participate in the solution, and we need to give them an outlet in which we can allow that. And we need to understand the economic impacts on this. And I'll say this, that one thing that I observed when we were looking at this in the early days, what you see depends on where you stand. Everyone has an opinion about things and they don't know what they don't know. And I've stood on stages and had arguments with friends of mine who are in policy areas who would suggest to us that as an industry, we intentionally overproduce so that we can throw food away, basically. I'm like, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. No one does that. We wouldn't be in business if we did that. But they only know what they know. What they see depends on where they stand. And once we get everyone in a room and we start talking about solutions and practical realities of life, we can move miles in a minute. Yeah. And this is one of those issues where everyone wants to. So we just have to figure out, and I commend you for the work that you're doing at CPMA to catalyze that conversation and those solutions. And I kind of look forward to where we're headed with this, because we cannot go it alone.
Well, and I'd say that a great segue to sort of the last question. And so we're going to wrap up in a moment. As an association, we're excited about the fact that we're seeing members like the food banks, like Vince's organization or Jessica's organization, the enablers, these partners, these other actors. We have the growers, we have the distributors, we have that part, but this is going to move because we've got those different perspectives, ultimately those partners around the table now. And that said, all this great work, back to the elephant metaphor. So thank you, Julie, for plugging my metaphor. So lots of good work, lots of right partnerships, lots of the right intent, but there's still some barriers, there's still some challenges. So from your experience, this is the last sort of question for the day. So I'll ask you quickly to just go through and share what you see as sort of the key obstacles and what are some of the greatest opportunities. And we've probably already heard about them, but just maybe reiterate them, and then we'll close off on your elevator pitch solution to it all. So maybe starting with Jessica.
Sure. Yeah. So I know we covered a lot on the policy side, so I won't go into that. But if you look again to like the market and economic kind of forces at B, if you just think about it, if the price of a commodity is less than the price of extracting it, all the logistics, the labor, it doesn't make a lot of sense it gets stayed in the field. And unfortunately, a lot of those growers absorb that cost. So surplus is really a cost driver, not there's not that incentive there. It's not really an asset. So unfortunately, the operation, like the friction of like distribution and diversion often outweighs the cost of just leaving the ground or throwing it out. Unfortunately, the economics is it's cheaper to throw it out sometimes than to divert in some markets, especially when there's organic bylaws. The other one is the consumer behavior. So different specs and grading leads to the systemic culling of products that don't meet grade. And if processors don't have another outlet and a secondary channel, that product doesn't see the market, even the secondary markets. And so we're seeing this at a systemic level across different commodities. And then you look at, okay, well, what do you do about that? Where's the solution space? It often is fragmented and opaque. So the food banks is a very visible, like a lot of people think immediately food banks. So that one is, I would say, not as opaque. But there's other, like you said, if you all adopt the hierarchy of like prevention, discount, donate, and then divert, there's a lot of solution providers in each of these segments. And we really need to kind of find those solution providers. It's really hard to connect those two if we don't really understand the solution space. Those upcyclers, they exist. We need to support them and prop them up. But there's not that infrastructure currently right now. And then finally is that the data and the coordination gaps. So demand and supply. So that's why we're doing the study with CPMA to really understand at the producer level and the grower level, where are the pain points and what's the volume and quantity and reasons behind this? And at that point, once we kind of understand that at a macro level, then we can start to match the solution space to those and predict rather than being that surprise chain and being on the receiving end and agile. The food banks are the best at being agile. They get what they get and they make the most of it. That's not really great for reliability, predictability, and planning. We need to rewrite that a little bit and add a little bit of predictability in with that. So being able to understand that will really help. So don't despair. Where there's barriers, there's opportunities and innovation. So for the innovators and the entrepreneurs in the room, there's a lot of opportunity and we're seeing it. I see it every day. And I'm just so pumped, I guess, to see just some of the creative solutions. And so I think the secondary marketplace, allowing businesses a really fast access to find the right tool for the job. So that's kind of the role that FoodMesh is seeking to play, is the network of networks. So we work with a lot of regional governments where they can call us and then we listen to what the business needs and we try to find a match within an hour. It could be a discount app like the Flash Foods and Too Good To Go's. It could be the donations streams, the food banks, the Second Harvest of the world. If it's farmers, there's like Loops, there's all these different amazing businesses and nonprofits. And so we're just connecting. We're like a big switchboard. Call us and we match it. So that's some of the work that we're trying to do because we all have that shared goal. Food waste on a visceral level hurts. If there's only one good thing about food waste, it's that it's probably one of the most unifying topics, I think, like ever, because everybody agrees that food waste is bad. So what do we do about it? There's other things too, and I won't go on about on-farm valorization, working with on-site dehydrators, working with, again, the upcyclers, pre-commitment models, working with seconds on the perfect produce so that there's a little bit more certainty and you don't need to rely on crop insurance, which is a disincentive for donations, by the way. The data layers and, I can go on and on, but there's a lot and a lot is happening and it is a positive news story. It's just, we're only rescuing 4% of our surplus right now. There's more we can do. And so we just really have to keep it at the forefront.
Yeah. There's a complexity in this, which you've touched on. And for the others, in terms of if there's, and I'm just mindful of time. So if there's one systemic barrier or opportunity you'd like to raise, and then we'll close it off this afternoon, what would you like to share?
I think going off that, maybe not completely changing, but changing, for lack of a better word, consumer habits and just having them be okay or understand why something looks a certain way. And as Kara Porter said yesterday in our sustainability meeting, people want the brightest looking apple. If the Granny Smith has a little bit of pink blush on it, well, probably might not sell that well. In terms of opportunity, I think the shared desire to reduce hunger and waste across the country as well. And, sustainability can't be a competition, as Tracy from PSA said yesterday, where we all have this shared goal. We can't be competing against one another to get there. We can cross the finish line together, and having that education piece. But as Martin at the back said yesterday, education is only there for people who want it and are receptive to listen. So figuring out how we can break through to people and educate on not only fresh produce as a whole, but farming and what it takes to actually feed this country. I think there's a lot of opportunities on that side.
This is very complex, lots of challenges, lots of opportunities. So there's no silver bullet. But if there was one thing you would focus on to increase the value of this food surplus, loss, and waste, basically help mitigate food loss and waste, what's the one thing that you would leave the audience with this morning? And we'll start from my side here. We'll start with Jessica and we'll go across. What's the one thing?
Connecting directly with farmers to find those opportunities and the opportunities for partnership and collaboration to feed people.
Connecting. Great. Hutch.
Mine's super basic. I'm going to start with just awareness and education, and that's at all levels. So at the farm, in the distribution channels, at retail, and at the consumer level. Just a better awareness and understanding of what can be done at each of those levels to mitigate this loss and increase the benefit.
Yeah. And what is being done even. Thank you. Yeah. Jessica.
Just that there is a strong business case for food loss and waste, and that there are lots of people that want to help you. So if you ever feel stuck or you need the information to convince your team members to do the right thing, reach out to ourselves, to any of the different solution providers. We're here to help. And just leave it at that.
Thank you. Julie.
I would say putting the focus on changing the narrative to this being a solution space, not a problem space.
It's an opportunity.
Like it's not food waste, it's surplus, right? This is a solution to many problems, not a problem with many potential solutions, actually.
Thank you. And Vince.
Coordination, collaboration, continuing that dialogue between industry, civil society, and government to start moving that elephant. And like we said, Dan, if you're going to move an elephant, you better all be moving it in the same direction. And I think that we're really starting to make headway on that. Certainly with the dialogue we've been having these last few days, Dan. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think, again, my picture was there's a lot of pieces in this puzzle, and are they all trying to move that elephant in the same? So I'm going to stick with my metaphor until someone tells me to stop. We're out of time. So thank you all for being here this morning, and thank our panelists for a great discussion.